we want to make and try to get everybody that we possibly can to know what God's Word says. But we also at the same time think there's some books that you can need that you can help you in your library. Another suggested text would be Burton Kaufman's commentary on the whole Bible, but there is one specific commentary dealing with 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus. We do have some copies of that at a discount rate for $16. Okay, we bought some of them a few years ago. They've still been laying around and nobody's bought them yet. So if you want to buy them now, I think the books are about $20 a pop, or you can get free. I like free, yes. If you go to that website, www.studylight.org, and that link right there, it's got these commentaries online, word for word, these specific commentaries. Okay, so if you're one of the people that like a book, and you want, and sometimes I want to do that because I want to underline or mark it, fine. If you're a person that can read it online and get the points, or maybe copy it and then paste it and you can do it later on, that's what you want to do. Ever how you study, whatever you could, the best way that you're going to study in that respect, that's what I want to encourage you to do. Okay? All righty? Yeah. Do what now?
Which one was on studylight.org?
It's the entire commentary on the whole Bible by Burton Kaufman's there. And if you got a copy of the syllabus, you have that link. So all you'll have to do is click on that link, hopefully, and go from there. Okay? So this is free online commentary. They put all of his books online. That's good. I like that. Hey, Justin, how you doing, brother? Come on in. Good to see you, man.
Sorry, I'm late.
That's okay. We're just starting class. We're just starting to go over the syllabus very quickly, and we're just getting down to the suggested schedule. Tonight is the first night, and again, this is what we're trying to do, is introduce the class. Here's the syllabus, the requirements. I'm going to ask you, if you would, you'll notice that in December the 15th, notice 1 Timothy 1, 12 through 17, 1 Timothy 2. These are passages that I would like to encourage us to memorize. Memorization is good for us in 2 or 3 reasons. Number one, it helps us to concentrate and helps us to focus. Number two, a lot of these passages that I'm going to ask you to memorize are going to help you maybe in your dealing with various things that you've got to go through in your life, or as you're trying to talk with people. So that's part of what that bold 1 Timothy 1, 12 through 17, that's going to be a memorization. And next week, between now and next week, study that from the King James and the New King James Version. That makes it easier on me. Okay? If we got every version on the world, then obviously I'd have some problems. I'd have to look them all up in that respect. So let's go back to the next page where it says, on the back of that page where it says requirements and grading. The Georgia School of Preaching and Biblical Studies catalog emphasizes that if you miss 3 classes, you'll receive a failing grade. Okay? Now, in every situation that I've been in as a teacher and a director, there have been things that happen. Let me tell you my story. Whenever my wife and I first got married, we moved to Mississippi. And she was with child. And I was attending a semester school, so we had our firstborn son, and 6 months, no, wasn't even 6 months later, I think it may have been 6 months later, my wife had to have gallbladder surgery. And this was the old days before they did it with laparoscopy. You know, they had to cut her open in that whole 9 yards. And I was sitting there taking care of my wife, and I didn't go to school for about 4, 5, or 6 weeks. Now that I was in a semester. And when I showed back up, they said, "We thought you resigned. We thought you withdrew." I said, "No, I've just been trying to take care of my wife." They worked with me, and I got caught up before that semester was over. You could do it if you really want to. So the bottom line is, if something happens to where you're sick and you can't be here, work with me. I'll work with you everywhere in the world to help you make sure you get this, okay? If you do not turn in your work in a timely manner, points will be deducted. If you do not complete the test and all the work within 30 days at the end of the quarter, you'll receive an I. And if you don't complete it by the end of the next quarter, then it's going to be an F, okay? But I'm not worried about anybody having to do that, all right? You're required, if you can, to read, and again, it don't take you that long, 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus 3 times. 3 times. The more you read it, the more you memorize it, the more you study it, the more you're going to get it. Brother Dan Winkler brought out the idea that before you teach a class, you need to read the book 50 times. Okay? Why? You ought to know it about 50 times, right? But do I always do that? No. But the more we know it, the more we're going to get it in our heart. Class notes or a journal will be required. And again, if you're taking this class online for credit, then send me the notes. We've gotten Zoom now, so a lot of this, there should be an interaction amongst us. And again, if I know you're here from Zoom, that's not going to be a problem. If we have a situation come up where, as I was saying earlier, that we might be snowed in, we can't get out for class, we can still have class. If you have your computer, we can still have class. Just get on Zoom. It's free for you. I have to pay because I'm the teacher. That's okay. We got it taken care of. All right? Because I believe in it that much. Midterm and final, we'll cover all the material up to the midterms and final. And I did put on that next page, the midterm was going to be January 26th. So that's a month and a half, well, about 2 months from now, right? So you're going to have plenty of time. And again, class participation is mandatory. I want us all to learn together. And so that's what it is. Do you have any questions on the syllabus? Any questions on what's required? Any problems? We're good to go. Good deal. All right. Get your pen and pencil out. We're going to start writing. And I'm going to try to give you as many of my notes as I possibly can. And I might send you these notes a little bit later on. I'm not sitting here saying that my notes are the best in the world, but it's always good to have the teacher's notes, right? Anytime you're reading the Bible, what do you need to do? There's some things you need to study. There's some things you need to think about. Number one, and I try to do this with every Bible book I'm trying to write or trying to read and study, I want to know who wrote the book. I want to know when the book was written. I want to know who he's writing the book to. Okay, so I'm going a little fast, but I'll try to get this. Who, what was the questions years ago? Who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? So I want to know who wrote it, and I want to know as much as I can about him. I want to know what he's going through. I want to know why he's going through that. I want to know why did he write the book. I want to try to figure out what the purpose of the book is. I want to know when he wrote the book, because that will make a difference. What's going on in the world whenever he's writing this book? Are there things going on in the world, or are there things going on in the church that I could study about maybe and find out a little bit more about? Who, what, when, where? Where was he when he wrote it? And where was the church, for example? Okay, when you come to Timothy, he's not writing to a church. He's writing to an individual, right? But where was Timothy? You might remember. That's okay. You'll know it before this class is over. He's in Ephesus. And again, you think about Ephesus, think about the Ephesian church and everything we know about the Ephesian church. The book of Ephesians was written to Ephesus, one of the 7 churches of Asia, right? He's Ephesus. Paul's work in the ministry began in Ephesus in the 3rd missionary journey. You think about Ephesus had perhaps some of the very best teachers and preachers in the world. Paul started the church. Then you have Timothy helping. You have John the Apostle, who, according to tradition, died there at that church. In this instance, when he gave up, when he was dying, the church, that's where he was. It was supposedly is told from various sources that whenever he was an older man, they would bring him in and he'd stand up and say, "Little children, love one another." That's his favorite words, right? And he was telling it to the Ephesian church. So you see, there's a lot of things going on here. Who, what, when, where, why. And of course, we don't need to worry so much about how. He would, of course, be writing by the inspiration of God. So this is what we're trying to deal with as we go through here. So number one, who wrote the book? The Apostle Paul. We see this in Ephesians chapter 1, or excuse me, 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 1. Okay? You got that? Go ahead. Somebody read that for me.
Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, for the commitment of God.
Okay, Paul, an apostle. All right, now go on to chapter 1 and verse 2. Who did he write it to? Okay, so as you're thinking about that, we already know who wrote it. So if we think about this, we know it was Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ. So now we know it's Paul the apostle. What do we know about Paul?
Pharisee of all Pharisees.
Excuse me?
Pharisee of all Pharisees, the great writer of the New Testament.
Right. You got the conversion account in Acts chapter 9, Acts chapter 22, Acts chapter 26. He was a man that was persecuting the church, then became a Christian because on the road to Damascus, the Lord picked him specifically to preach to who? To the Gentiles, to the Gentile race. And from that point forward, his life was forever changed. We see a lot of his life in 1 Corinthians, especially in 2 Corinthians. We see all through the book of Acts, he becomes the main center point. And as we continue to look at this, we're going to see that these are perhaps the very last books Paul wrote. 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. We know for a fact that 2 Timothy is the last book because he said, I'm ready to be offered and the time of my departure is at hand. Okay? So we know for a fact that is probably the last book. And these books were probably written, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus were probably written between the time when he was first imprisoned and when he finally died. And I'm not going to go so fast on it that I'll go through this slow enough so you can follow what's going on. We remember the fact, let's just kind of get the history here a little bit of Paul. In Acts chapter 21, 27 through 36, he was arrested in Jerusalem. And you remember the whole situation that was going on there. They had accused him of bringing Gentiles into the temple, and they were about ready to kill him. Remember that? Then if you go on into Acts chapter 22, that's where he gives the account of how he became a Christian. And everything's fine until he mentions that God sent him to the Gentiles. The Jews, again, wanted to take him apart. We remember there was a Roman garrison there. And again, these events actually take place from Acts chapter 21 through Acts chapter 28. Okay? So as you read all of that, you can see what's going on. All right? We see that the Roman garrison saved him. I'm summarizing this very quickly. Then his sister's son, that would make him his nephew, found out that there were some Jews wanting to kill him. And what? That night, 490 soldiers, took him from there in Jerusalem to Caesarea. He spends 2 years in Caesarea. And then he's brought before Felix, and he appeals to Caesar because it looks like otherwise he would have been sent back and probably killed by the Jews. He appeals to Caesar, and he winds up going to Rome. And as what we're reading, as I said, from Acts chapter 21 through the end of the book of Acts, is that whole events that I'm talking about right here. So he winds up in Rome for 2 years. He obviously, from what we're reading in passages, he talks about what is known as the prison epistles. Now, what are those prison epistles? The prison epistles are Philippians, Colossians, Philemon, and Ephesians. Now, we call these the prison epistles because, and I want to emphasize this, in Acts chapter 28, as the book closes, he's not in prison like we a lot of times see him. He's not in a dungeon. He's not in a jail cell and just literally hanging on to life. Acts 28 tells us that he is in his own hired house, but there is still a guard with him the whole time. So these prison epistles are all written at this time whenever he is either in Caesarea or in Rome, okay? And again, depending on what commentary you read and what people think, some of them think it was in Caesarea, some of them think it was all in Rome, but the bottom line is that was it. He will talk about his bonds. He will talk about chains. He will talk, and that's, again, why we call those the prison epistles. So all of these are written during the same time frame, probably in the neighborhood of that of AD, anywhere from AD 63 to possibly AD 65, sometime in that general time frame. All right, that's roughly when those books are going to be written. And again, every last one of them are talking about in one way or another about these things that he was going through. So those are the prison epistles. Now, in some of the prison epistles, he talks about in Philemon verse 22, for example. He will tell Philemon, he says, Philemon, get a bed ready. I'm coming to meet you. I'm coming to see you. Philemon was a member of the Colossian church. And we know this, again, because when we read the book of Colossians, Philemon is mentioned and how the book was going to be brought by Onesimus, who was Philemon's slave. So Onesimus was going to bring the book to the Colossians, and Philemon was there, so he says, get a bed ready for me. He will tell the Philippians, he says, I hope to see you shortly. So he had full belief. Paul had full belief that he was going to be released from prison. And he was. And so probably what happened is right after that, as I said, he emphasizes the idea that I'm going to be coming to see you, so I've been released. And then here is a possible itinerary. In Philippians chapter 2, verses 19 through 23, we read that as soon as he was acquitted, he sent Timothy to Philippi with news of his release. Philippians chapter 2, verse 19 through 23. So he was going to send Timothy to Philippi. All right? That probably took place in anywhere from, like I said, 63. Now, what happened in 64 AD? Anybody remember? Yeah. A fellow by the name of Nero, who was the emperor, started the fire in Rome and blamed it on who? Christians. Blamed it on the Christians. Okay, so that's what I was saying, from 63 to 65, that general time frame may have been or maybe 62 to 63, somewhere in there, is whenever he wrote these prison epistles. So we've known in 64 AD, Nero's efforts to persecute the Christians would have begun. Paul, if he was still in prison at that time, he would not have been released then, would he? And in fact, Nero, in all probability, would have had him put to death first, right? So you see, he was released. We don't mention Paul's name there. And so what we write, and again, we go now to Timothy and Titus to really start finding out a lot of this stuff. As I said in Philippians chapter 2, he sent Timothy to Philippi with news of his release. Then Paul left Rome for Asia Minor. Asia Minor would be where Ephesus, Colossae, and some of these other places are, by way of the island of Crete. And he would say in Titus chapter 1, verse 5, for this reason I left you in Crete. So we know that he made it to Crete and he left Titus there. And again, as we look at the book of Titus, we're going to see that he's in Crete and what he's supposed to be doing there. All righty. Now, after arriving in the city of Ephesus, by the way, was the capital of Asia Minor. It was this was the capital of the Roman province. Paul's work in Ephesus, there's two places he seemed to spend more time than anywhere else. He spent at least 1.5 years in Corinth, because he talks about the 18 months there. Am I going too fast? By the way, if you're losing on this, I will send you a link to this. We're trying to video it, and I will save it to you on my YouTube page. So if there's something that you may have missed, you can go back up there and find it, and I will send you the link. Okay, I'm making this as easy as I can. All right, I don't know what else I could do, but I'm getting as close as I can to doing it. So, coming back to what I'm saying here, he arrived in Ephesus. He had left Titus in Crete. He arrived in Ephesus and he proceeded to Colossae, where, according to Philemon 22, he had asked Philemon to prepare him a bed and a place to stay. So, after that, we read that at Ephesus, he was rejoined by Timothy. So Timothy rejoined him. Now remember, what did he do? He sent Timothy saying to the Philippians, what? I've been released. He was rejoined by Timothy in Ephesus. So when we pick up with the book of Ephesus, he's going to say, Timothy, I left you in Ephesus. So there's how Timothy gets back there at that particular time. From somewhere in Macedonia, Paul wrote the letter, 1 Timothy and Titus, to further instruct these preachers in their assignment. We also see in Titus chapter 3, verse 12, that he requested Titus to come to him after he sent Artemas or Tychicus and to meet him in Nicopolis by winter. Now, this is a lot, he's going to send some people to Titus in Crete. Titus is supposed to come to him. And so that's what winds up happening. And so from Nicopolis, then Paul probably traveled to Spain. In Romans, the 15th chapter, verse 23, he talked about the fact that when he was in Rome, he wanted to go to Spain. And he says, I want you to help me to go to Spain. He wanted these churches to help him in his work and what he was trying to do. So, did he make it or not? That's a big question that we could spend hours on. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but if you read some of these commentaries, you'll see it. There was a writer named Clement. Clement was supposedly a disciple of Paul. And in his letter, he would say this, and I'm quoting, that Paul had preached the gospel in the east and in the west. So where would be Spain? Spain would be the west from where he's talking about. And he had instructed the whole world in righteousness. And that, again, Clement says that he had gone to the extremity of the West before his martyrdom. So it sounds to me like he probably went to Spain. But that's what we call extra biblical literature. And we take it and say, okay, it could have happened. It may not have. But it would seem like, again, if one of Paul's disciples said that, and we have a record of it, that probably what happened. All right. Then what? All right. After his work in Spain, then this is where 2 Timothy comes in. If he had come back from Spain, here's what happened. And we start getting all these passages in 2 Timothy chapter 4. He probably revisited Asia Minor, and he left Trophimus in Miletus sick. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 20. All right? Who's got that? Brother Mark, you got that?
Yeah, Erastus stayed in Corinth, but Trophimus I have left in Miletus sick.
Right. So he left Trophimus and Miletus sick. In 2 Timothy chapter 1 at verse 4, he probably had an emotional reunion with Timothy, according to what he says there. Who wants to read 2 Timothy 1:4 for me?
Really, greatly desiring to see you, being mindful of the tears that I may be filled with joy.
So, mindful of your tears. There would have been a tearful reunion. Timothy would have seen him there. So that's, he said, and he said, as he's writing this very last letter, and as you look at it that way, this may very well be the really prison epistle that we have, in the fact that what? He's now awaiting execution. He said, I'm mindful of your tears. So obviously there was an emotional reunion, and he thinks about Timothy's tears. We know in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 13, he had visited the city of Troas. Somebody read 2 Timothy 4:13 for me.
When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas, also the books, and above all the parchments.
Okay, the cloak, the parchment, and the books. Okay, the parchment, according to, and again, we'll look at this when we get to the end of it, but it's probably his copy of the scriptures. And he thought that was very important. He wanted that. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 13. And then he probably, so what do we need? He revisited Asia Minor. He had met with Timothy in Ephesus. He visited Troas. And then he winds up going to Rome. Now, whether he was arrested before or after his arrival, we don't know. We don't know all the details about that. We know that Titus was with Paul in Rome. And then Titus went to Dalmatia, 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 10. Okay, 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 10. Am I getting anybody lost? Everybody still following what we're trying to see here? Okay. All right. From his prison cell, he writes Timothy to come to him before winter. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 21. And it may be that he may have died about the year 66 AD. Another interesting passage that comes into play is Hebrews 13:23. Hebrews 13:23. Okay, when you've got that, read it for me.
I want you to know that our brother Timothy has been released. If you arrive soon, I will come with him to see you.
All right, so now you have the Hebrew writer, whoever he may be, saying that Timothy had been released. Now that sounded like what? Timothy had been in prison of some sort. So when you think about this, again, as I was reading one particular commentary, it says, well, this proves that Paul definitely wrote Hebrews. Well, when would Timothy have been captured? Would he have been captured whenever he brought this stuff to Paul? Possibly. Maybe thrown in prison himself. So if Paul lost his head right after that, then what? That would argue that what? That Paul had died before Hebrews was written, right? So I'm not going to sit back. Some people will argue, well, that proves that Paul wrote Hebrews, and it could. But again, and maybe given the book to Timothy, another passage in Hebrews chapter 2 emphasizes the idea that he says, it seems to me like it's written by a second generation Christian. In Hebrews chapter 2, and this is again, this is more in the book of you'll study this as you go through the book of Hebrews, and you'll again hear the different opinions as to who wrote the book of Hebrews. I'm thinking it is a second generation Christian because he emphasizes this idea. Listen to Hebrews chapter 1. Chapter 2, verse 1. Therefore, we must give the more earnest heed to the things we heard, lest we drift away. For if the word spoken through angels prove steadfast, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? Which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord, and was confirmed to us by those who heard him, God bearing witness both with signs and wonders, with various miracles and gifts of the Spirit. Now, in other passages, Paul would argue his apostleship and prove his apostleship because of the miracles he did. Here, the Hebrew writer is what? Saying, no, if it is Paul, he's using himself in the third person. Like, I'm not really there. He's talking maybe about the other apostles. To me, they don't make sense. To me, it's saying, okay, it was confirmed to us by those who heard him, God bearing witness with signs and wonders and various miracles at that time. So to me, Hebrews was written by a second generation Christian. My opinion, that's not going to be on the test. And if you disagree with me, you still got to love me. The Bible says so. Okay. All righty. So Paul, we know, traveled to at least 6 different places after his release. He traveled to Colossae, Colossians chapter 4, verse 9. Philippi, Philippians chapter 2, verse 24. Crete, Titus 1, verse 5. Troas, 2 Timothy 4:13. Miletus, 2 Timothy 4:20. Corinth, 2 Timothy 4:20. And Ephesus. And again, so that's kind of where we are right there. So again, 1st, 2nd Timothy and Titus were probably written between it. Excuse me. 1 Timothy and Titus were probably written between the imprisonment. 2 Timothy probably before he died. Okay, because he will say in chapter 4, I'm ready to be offered. The time of my departure is at hand. I've fought a good fight. I've finished my course. I've kept the faith. Okay, so one of the things I love about 2 Timothy, there's no regret. He's ready to die. There's no regret. He has no regret whatsoever for what he's done and the preaching that he's had. And that tells us a lot about Paul and his commitment to God and how he's helping Timothy to do the same thing. Now, what do we know about Timothy? This is all still introductory matters. We haven't even gotten into the book yet, have we? Okay, so you see now why it's going to take maybe every bit of 13 weeks to get through this, especially at this rate. Okay, what do we know about Timothy? First mention that we have of Timothy is found in Acts 16, verses 1 through 3. All right, Acts 16, verses 1 through 3. And this is where he's mentioned. All right, and notice some things that he says about Timothy. Who's got Acts 16? Thank you, brother.
1 through 3.
1 through 3.
Paul came also to Derbe and to Lystra. A disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but his father was a Greek. He was well spoken of by the brothers at Lystra and Iconium. Paul wanted Timothy to accompany him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in those places, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. Okay. So Timothy, according to Acts 16, was the son of 2 cultures. His mom was a Jew. His father was a Gentile.
And we know some other things about him in that respect. In 2 Timothy 1 verse 5. In 2 Timothy 1 verse 5, we know his mother and grandmother's name. Right? Who's got that? Anybody?
Lois and Munich.
To remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which shall first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am sure is in you also.
Okay, the unfeigned faith that was in grandmother and mama. So who probably taught them? Who probably taught them? It was probably his grandmother and his mother, right? Who taught him the truth. Ladies, don't ever minimize what you could do in teaching the truth. Don't ever. When you teach those kids, when you teach people, don't ever minimize it. Timothy would not have been Paul's co-worker if it hadn't been for his mama and his grandmama. And I think that says a lot. Okay. Again, Acts 16 is the context of the second missionary journey. So Paul, as he's beginning the second missionary journey, he meets Timothy and takes him with him on that. Now, we find some other passages. 1 Timothy 1 verse 2. 1 Timothy 1 verse 2. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
The idea that Paul circumcised Timothy, as the Jews say,
Right.
is that kind of like a case in point of what he talked about in Romans 15:16, when we're talking about the weak brother and strong brother argument?
Right. I think
Kind
it's,
of an example of that right here.
that's exactly right. And he did it in that case, but he will also make a point in the book of Acts, and as well as Galatians chapter 2, that he took Titus, but he did not do that with Titus. And I think it was another situation, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, he became all things to all men that he might by all means save some. And was putting Timothy in that situation where Timothy would be able to have a greater impact upon the Jews. So absolutely right. You're absolutely right in that respect. All right, 1 Timothy 2 verse 8. 1 Timothy 1 verse 2. Who's got that?
To Timothy, a true son in the faith, grace, mercy, and peace from our Father, from our God and our Father, and Jesus Christ our Lord.
Okay, so he calls him a true child in the what? The faith. So Paul would look at Timothy as what? His son in the faith, right? And that's very instructive as well. So Paul is going to help Timothy to be the very best that he possibly can be. He's going to help him to know what he needs to do and how to handle situations. So the letter